It's a July night in Chicago, 1995. Picture the kind of heat that doesn't break, even at midnight. The kind you can feel pressing through the walls of your own apartment right now, if you close your eyes and remember the worst heat you've ever slept through. Now imagine 3 days of it straight with no relief, no breeze, no cool room to walk into. Inside a small apartment on the south side, a ceiling fan turns slowly, pushing hot air in a circle that does nothing at all. Nobody knocks on this door. Nobody has knocked for 3 days. By the time anyone does, it's too late. And this apartment isn't the only one. Across the city that week, more than 700 people die. Most of them alone, in rooms just like this one, in a heat wave that barely made the evening news at the time. Here's what nobody expected. A young researcher starts digging through the death records from that week, trying to understand what actually happened, expecting the heat to explain everything on its own. And buried in the numbers, he finds something that doesn't fit the story you'd assume is true. The story you're probably already telling yourself right now about what killed these people. Something that will take him years to fully explain. And when he finally does, it's going to upend almost everything you think you know about what it means to live by yourself. We'll get to what he found, but not yet, because right now, you need to understand something bigger about your own life, something happening quietly around you whether you clocked it or not. You're living through the largest shift in how human beings arrange their lives since the baby boom, and you probably never once stopped to notice it happening. This is not a story about loneliness. This is not a story about families falling apart. This is not a story about a generation giving up on each other. This is a story about hundreds of millions of people, maybe including you, quietly redesigning what it means to be connected, and most of them don't even know they're part of the same movement. Take Maya, a composite drawn from a pattern researchers see again and again. 31, a UX designer in Chicago. Yes, that's Chicago. 2 years ago, her roommate of 6 years moved out to live with a partner, and Maya faced a choice you may have faced yourself at some point, or will someday. Find someone new to split rent with, or take the smaller apartment down the street and live alone for the first time in her adult life. She chose alone, and for about a month, it felt exactly like the thing you'd expect it to feel like. Quiet evenings. No one to talk to about her day. She caught herself leaving the TV on just to hear another voice in the room. You know that trick, even if you've never lived alone yourself. Almost everyone does it at some point, usually without admitting it out loud. But here's the part that surprised her, and might surprise you too. By month 3, her calendar looked nothing like she expected it to. Pottery class every Tuesday. A running group Saturday mornings she'd never have joined if she still had a roommate to stay in with on weekends. She wasn't isolated. She was in some strange way more social than she'd ever been while living with someone else. Pay attention to this, because Maya's story isn't just one anecdote. It's a pattern showing up in a number so large it's hard for you to actually picture. Right now, hundreds of millions of people worldwide live alone. In the United States, that's over 37 million adults, 29% of all households, up from just 13% back in 1960. You could walk into a single apartment building in Manhattan right now, and there's a good chance more than half the units you pass hold exactly one person. Why now, though? Part of it is simple economics. Rising incomes, especially among women, have made living independently something you can actually afford in a way earlier generations often couldn't. Part of it is timing. People marrying later, or not marrying at all, stretching out the years where living solo is the default rather than a waiting room before something else begins. None of it is one single cause. It's a dozen small shifts in how you and everyone around you gets to choose a life, all pointing the same direction at once. Now watch what happens next, because this isn't just an American story you can shrug off as a local quirk. Living alone has risen in 26 of the 30 richest countries on Earth since 2010. And nowhere shows you the end point of this trend better than Stockholm. Sociologists call it, only half-jokingly, the solo living capital of the world. 60% of households there are single occupants. It's not just the young and single either. Take a resident like Ingrid, 72, a retired teacher in Copenhagen, a stand-in for the millions of older adults across Scandinavia living the same way. In Denmark, close to half of all households now hold exactly one person, a share that's climbed for decades as people live longer, healthier, and more independently than any generation before them. If you pictured an elderly widow isolated in a quiet apartment when you heard that, you're not entirely wrong, but you're not entirely right either. Ingrid has coffee with the same 3 neighbors every Thursday, something she started doing years before her husband passed, not after. Here's what's strange, though. Stockholm didn't collapse under the weight of that number. The city built itself around it instead. Smaller apartments, yes, but also cafes on every corner, public saunas, co-working spaces designed for people who work and live by themselves but still want to be around other people during the day. The city didn't treat living alone as a problem for you to solve. It treated it as a design brief. So here's the question worth sitting with before we go any further, and it's one you should ask yourself honestly. If living alone were really the quiet tragedy you've always assumed it is, where's the collapse? Where are the empty cafes, the dying neighborhoods, the cities falling apart under the weight of all these solitary lives? Because that's not what the data shows. Not even close. Stay with me. You're about to find out why. So let's recap where we are, because you deserve a clear picture before we go any further. Living alone isn't a niche lifestyle anymore. It's one of the fastest growing ways human beings organize their lives on nearly every continent, and the cities doing it best aren't falling apart. They're adapting, and you're watching that adaptation happen in real time, whether you've noticed it or not. If you're finding this genuinely surprising, and you probably are because almost nobody talks about it this way, that's exactly why this channel exists for you. Hit subscribe if you want more of this. The hidden systems shaping how you actually live, not how you assume you live. And drop a comment telling me which surprised you more so far. The size of this shift or Stockholm? Because we're not done with you yet. There's a much bigger reversal coming. Now, if some part of you is still resisting this, still thinking, come on, deep down these people must be lonely, you're not wrong to feel that pull, and you shouldn't feel bad about it. Most of us grew up believing that living alone is something you settle for, not something you choose. And honestly, that's not an unreasonable thing for you to believe. For most of human history, survival depended on the group, on being seen and counted by people around you every single day. You're wired, the same as everyone else watching this, to read solitude as a warning sign. Add in a few decades of movies and news segments about elderly people found alone, forgotten, and it makes sense that living alone and abandoned got tangled up in your head the same way they got tangled up in everyone else's. But here's the part nobody tells you. A sociologist named Eric Klinenberg at New York University spent years studying exactly this question, pulling data from hundreds of in-depth interviews with people who live by themselves in their 20s and in their 80s. And what he found flips the assumption you grew up with completely on its head. People who live alone, on average, eat out more, exercise more, go to more concerts and lectures, and volunteer more than people who live with a partner. Not despite living alone. Because of it. Take David, another composite, built from that same research pattern. 58, a software engineer outside Austin. 2 years ago, his kids moved out the same year his marriage ended. And for a few months, he barely left the house except for work. A version of the exact fear you might quietly have about ending up alone yourself someday. Classic isolation. The thing everyone's afraid of, playing out exactly the way you'd expect it to. Then he started showing up, almost by accident, at a coffee shop 2 blocks from his new apartment. Same time every morning. Same barista. After a few weeks, the same regulars. Nobody there knew about his divorce or his empty house. They just knew him as the guy who ordered a black coffee at 7:15 and always asked about their day. Sociologists have a name for that coffee shop, and once you hear it, you'll start noticing it everywhere in your own life. They call it a third place, a term coined by the sociologist Ray Oldenburg. Not home, not work, but the place in between where connection doesn't need a reason. And here's the part that should worry you more than any statistic about people living alone. Those places have been disappearing from your neighborhood and mine for decades. Post-war zoning policies built entire American suburbs with nowhere to walk to. Chain stores replaced the corner shop where the owner knew your name. The mall that used to be everyone's third place emptied out and never got replaced. Researchers who study this call it the erosion of social infrastructure. The physical places, not just the relationships, that used to make everyday connection almost automatic. You didn't have to try. You just walked outside and it was there. Now, for a lot of you watching this, it isn't. It has to be built on purpose, which is exactly why a whole ecosystem of new third places is starting to appear where the old ones vanished. Co-working cafes, run clubs, hobby classes that exist as much for the 90 minutes of company as for the skill being taught. The sociologist Robert Putnam wrote about a version of this decline decades ago in his study of Americans quietly dropping out of the clubs, leagues, and civic groups that use to structure their weeks. What's happening with third places today is the same story, just playing out in physical space instead of membership rosters, and it's the reason the gap between Englewood and Auburn Gresham matters to you, even if you've never set foot in either one. There's one more thing worth sitting with here, and it's worth asking yourself directly. If living alone were the real danger, David should have been the case that proves it to you. He had every risk factor: sudden isolation, an empty house, a life event that would flatten almost anyone. But he wasn't undone by living alone. He was undone, for a while, by not having anywhere to go be around people without an agenda. Once he found that, the coffee shop, the 7:15 ritual, the danger passed. Not because he stopped living alone, because he stopped being disconnected from the people around him. So let's go back. Back to that apartment in Chicago, July of 1995. Back to the young researcher going through the data, trying to make sense of 700 deaths in 1 week. The researcher you met at the very start of this, before you knew where any of it was going. Here's the part he almost missed, and it's a detail that should change how you think about your own street. When he mapped where the deaths happened, block by block, something strange showed up. 2 neighborhoods, right next to each other, Englewood and Auburn Gresham. Same microclimate. Both overwhelmingly black, both poor, both with large populations of older residents living alone, same as you might picture in either place if someone described them to you cold. And yet Englewood's death rate was 33 per 100,000 people, one of the highest in the city. Auburn Gresham's was 3 per 100,000. 11 times lower. Same demographics. Same heat. Completely different outcome. That gap is the real mystery at the center of this whole story. And it isn't about money. And it isn't about who you'd expect to be more vulnerable on paper. Auburn Gresham had something Englewood didn't. Sidewalks people actually used, small grocery stores and diners that stayed open late, churches that doubled as gathering places, block clubs that had survived decades of decline elsewhere in the city. Englewood had lost almost all of it. Its commercial strip hollowed out, its storefronts boarded, its residents with nowhere to be seen if they didn't come out for a few days, the exact isolation you might quietly fear for yourself someday. And there it is, the reversal you've been waiting for since the opening. It was never really about who lived alone and who didn't. Both neighborhoods had plenty of older residents living by themselves. It was about who had somewhere to go be around people and who didn't. The researcher, Eric Klinenberg, before he'd even finished his PhD, had stumbled onto a fact that would define the rest of his career, and it's the fact you should carry with you after this video ends. Living by yourself doesn't kill you. Living somewhere with no third place does. Think about what that means for the 100 million ordinary evenings happening right now, all over the world, including maybe your own tonight. A woman in Stockholm walking to her regular cafe. Maya, 3 stops on the Tuesday pottery class. David, 7:15, same order, same barista. None of them are alone in the way you've been taught to fear. They're connected, just not in a shape 100 years ago anyone would recognize as family, and maybe not in a shape you'd recognize either, until right now. That's the modern bridge nobody draws for you. Your grandparents' generation got connection built into the architecture of their lives. A big house, a full table, relatives down the street, whether they liked it or not, whether they even got along or not. You're not getting that architecture back, and pretending you can is its own kind of trap. But you're not without one either. You're building yours one small deliberate choice at a time, a running group, a coffee shop, a Tuesday night class, instead of inheriting it by default the way they did. This is not a story about a generation choosing isolation. This is not a story about the death of the family. This is not a story about technology replacing human contact. This is a story about connection changing its shape around you and still finding you if you leave a door open for it. So here's what this all actually comes down to, for you specifically. First, the truth of it. The rise of living alone isn't some crisis sneaking up on you. It's the largest shift in how humans arrange their daily lives since the baby boom. And it's happening in almost every wealthy country on earth at the same time you're watching this. That's not a breakdown. That's just what's true right now, whether it matches what you were taught growing up or not. Second, what it means for you specifically. Whether you live alone or not matters far less than something almost nobody ever asks you about. Do you have a third place? A cafe? A class? A corner where people know your order and you know theirs? Because that, not your address and not your relationship status, is what actually protects you. And third, and this is the part one want you to sit with after you close this video tonight. Somewhere out there right now, someone is sitting in an apartment by themselves, and they think that means they've been left behind by something everyone else already figured out. They haven't. And if that's ever been you, on a night like tonight, you haven't either. You're just early to a way of living the rest of us are still catching up to. One where connection isn't handed to you by an address or a marriage certificate. You go out and you build it on purpose one Tuesday at a time. And that, it turns out, might be the more honest kind of connection all along. Not the kind you're handed. The kind you actually choose over and over on purpose. If you had to pick your own third place right now, somewhere you could show up without a reason and still belong, where would that be for you? Tell me below, because the story was never really about being alone. It's about the door that's still open whenever you decide to walk through it.